It's raining outside my window, heavy rain mixed with hail, and it reminded me of something that happened to me 20 years ago. Back then, I could have easily lost my life. But honestly, that wasn't even the scariest part. What I faced was a truly horrifying experience for any normal person. My name is Simon, and I've been traveling the world my entire life. Ever since I was a kid, my parents would take me to different countries, and when I grew up, I just kept going. But now, I was more drawn to places where people rarely go. The wild, forests, mountains, rivers. One day, I decided to take on one of the toughest journeys of my life. Siberia. A massive forest stretching for miles and miles. Wild animals, from harmless little hares to wolves, bears, and even lynxes. I flew into Yakutia and mapped out an incredibly challenging route. I was supposed to hike 30 miles through the forest and cross a few small rivers along the way. After checking into a hotel, I headed into the city of Yakutsk to buy the gear I was missing. I already had a ton of stuff with me, but I still needed a tent and a sleeping bag. It was scorching hot that day, but I wasn't planning to leave just yet. I wandered the city like a kid seeing a new place for the first time, the same way I used to when traveling with my parents. I stocked up on food, bought a tent, and grabbed some extra gear for the hike. After a full day of walking around, I headed back to the hotel. That night was unforgettable. I was filled with anticipation for the upcoming trek, and, to be honest, a bit of fear. I had no idea what was waiting for me out there. The only people who knew where I was going were my friend back in Los Angeles and a girl working at the hotel reception. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep. At exactly 5 a.m., I woke up and started getting ready while having a quick breakfast. My huge hiking backpack was packed with everything I needed: the tent, sleeping bag, and plenty of survival gear. I left the hotel, caught a taxi out of town, and headed to the starting point of my route. 20 minutes later, we arrived, and I stepped out into the vast Siberian taiga. The first part of the hike was easy, not much to say about it. I wore heavy-duty clothing to keep the insects off me, but because of that, I was sweating like crazy. After about 2 hours of walking, I was beyond relieved when it finally started to rain. By then, I had covered roughly 10 miles of forest. I thought I'd be at the river by now, but according to my map, I still had a few more miles to go. I stopped for a water break, catching my breath. Honestly, I hadn't even checked the weather forecast, and that was a huge mistake. Moving on, I soon reached my first real obstacle: a river. It wasn't very deep, and I could cross it easily enough, but the current was strong, no room for error. I found a big stick to help me keep my balance as I waded across, soaked to the bone, but successful. I knew I needed to dry off and rest. It was time to set up camp. I decided to walk a bit further, hoping to find a nice spot sheltered by trees or cliffs from the wind. That's when I saw it, a structure. From a distance, I thought it was a small house, but as I got closer, I realized it was an old abandoned trailer, or maybe a truck cabin. Hard to say exactly. Honestly, I hope the guys from the Behind the Dark channel can show you what it looked like. They'd probably explain it better than I can. I checked it out and saw it was perfectly usable for a night's stay. There was even an intact window, which was surprising. Inside, I found a small stove. My guess? Local hiking enthusiasts had built this place as a shelter for trekkers to rest and spend the night. I hadn't expected such a lucky find. Most importantly, it was a solid place to get out of the rain, which by then had started coming down even harder. I spread out my stuff on some wooden boards that looked like makeshift beds and immediately got to work lighting the stove. I had no idea yet how big of a mistake I had made by stepping into that shelter, but that realization would come later. For now, I had a few peaceful hours ahead in this secluded place. I gathered some firewood and lit the stove using paper. The wood was wet from the rain, so it burned poorly, but I managed. I wiped down a small table inside and laid out my food: some chocolate bars, ham, bread, vegetables, and a few canned goods I'd picked up in Russia. I decided to heat up some buckwheat on the stove, adding green onions for flavor. And man, it was delicious. After that, a cup of tea from my thermos and a chocolate bar for dessert. Inside, it was warm and cozy. The thought of being completely alone for miles around was surreal, an exciting yet strange feeling. hard to describe. Outside, the rain intensified. Thunder, lightning, hail. After finishing my tea and resting a bit, I stepped outside to collect more firewood to stack near the stove. When I turned back and looked at that old trailer, it just hit me. The atmosphere of the place was incredible. So much so, I didn't even feel like going further, as if nothing else on my route would impress me as much as this. Still, I needed to stay the night. I found a fallen birch tree nearby and went to gather large branches from it. That's when I heard it, a noise. The rain made the whole forest loud, but this was different. Metal, striking metal. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Spoiler, it wasn't. I went back inside, rolled out my sleeping bag, and noticed something odd. In the corner were 2 more sleeping bags and some clothes. Looked like someone had left them there, trusting no one would steal them. The place was surprisingly clean, too. I didn't think much of it. Listening to the hail hammering down, I lay down and soon drifted off. It was already dark. I hoped the rain would stop by morning, but morning never came. I was jolted awake by a loud noise. Couldn't tell what it was. Out in the forest, especially in the rain, sounds blur together. But this one was different. Loud, sharp. I got up, took a sip of water, and noticed the stove was nearly out of wood. Glancing out the window, I saw a light, a flashlight. Someone was coming. I don't know why, but something in my gut screamed at me to hide, not to let them see me. Call it intuition, or maybe God himself whispered it straight into my brain. I grabbed my backpack and slipped outside, taking cover behind the shelter, peeking around the corner. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it was in my throat. 2 men approached the trailer. Seeing the glow from the stove inside, they immediately pulled out rifles. Shit. I think I knew what this was about. They were dragging something heavy in a large black bag. I couldn't make out their words. Rain was too loud, but they were clearly pissed someone had used their hideout. They stepped inside. Quietly, I crept to the window, listening, watching. They started tossing stuff around, looking dangerous as hell. Then one of them said, "That idiot left his gear. He's hiding nearby. Let's go teach him a lesson." The other guy laughed and cocked his rifle. I crouched lower, soaking wet, shivering, shirtless. But the rain was my ally now, masking my presence. I saw them exit the shelter and start walking away. That's when one of them turned his head, and our eyes met. Fuck. That moment stretched out like an eternity. Time froze. But really, I bolted into the forest immediately. They started shouting and firing, but not at me. Warning shots, maybe. Or maybe they wanted to scare me into giving up my stuff. Either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I ran about 400 meters into the woods, knowing I couldn't stray too far from my planned route. I still had to get home, and then the rain stopped. Jesus, could you have picked a worse time for a joke? That's what I thought. In the pitch dark, I moved slowly, retracing my steps from earlier that day. I was terrified of getting lost, but I didn't rush. I focused on memorizing every tree. It wasn't pitch black. I could still see enough to navigate. And hell, was I lucky. I made it to the river. Sure, I came out in a completely different spot than planned, but following the river, by morning, I found my original trail. By 10 a.m., I stumbled out of the forest and flagged down a car on the road. Back at the hotel, I passed out. Who were those 2 men? You tell me. But I've learned something. You don't need to venture into the most remote jungles to find adventure. Sometimes, it finds you. My name is Ashley. My husband and I have been married for 11 years now. We recently celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. We hadn't planned on going anywhere far, but my parents surprised us with plane tickets and paid for a trip to Siberia. We had never been that far from home before, but we couldn't say no. We packed lightly and set off on the journey. The flight was long, with 3 layovers, but we were thrilled and full of anticipation. Waiting for us was a massive house in one of the most beautiful places on Earth, Siberia, and also one of the scariest days of our lives. The house was surrounded by dense forest, a lake, hiking trails, and steep cliffs. It was a mountainous area where we wouldn't encounter a single soul, except for the woman managing the property, who lived in a small separate cabin nearby. We arrived around 2 p.m. on June 21st. A woman named Maria met us and showed us to our house. It had 3 stories, lots of rooms, and a huge open living room. There was a fireplace, a massive dining table, a TV. I had no idea why we needed such a big place, but it was completely ours for 2 days. We unpacked our things, chose a bedroom, and decided to go for a walk. After all, this place was supposed to be one of the most beautiful spots on the planet. We walked down to the lake, wandered through the forest, and climbed up to a lookout point where we could see the vastness of the wooded landscape. We spent several hours out there, and the sun sets quickly in this region. We were walking back along a forest trail when everything started to look completely different. The trees no longer seemed beautiful in the fading light. Everything was taking on a darker, more menacing tone. Whenever I looked into the woods, I kept feeling like something, or someone, was watching me from the shadows. Old childhood fears began bubbling up in my mind. I wondered if Alex was feeling the same thing, or if he was totally unfazed. I've always been afraid of the dark, and all I wanted was to get back to the house as soon as possible. And when I finally saw it in the distance, glowing with warm light from its windows, I felt a wave of relief. The house looked like safety, like comfort. As we reached the front, Alex suddenly said he must have dropped his glasses somewhere. He turned on the flashlight on his phone and started heading back down the path to look for them. I offered to go with him, but he told me to just go inside and start making dinner. "All right," I said. "I'd do that, but first, I needed to use the bathroom." I went upstairs to the second floor and took care of business. While I was up there, I noticed dirt on the floor, like actual soil or sand, as if someone had walked through in dirty shoes. I thought places like this usually got cleaned before guests arrived, but whatever, it wasn't a big deal. I figured I'd just mop it up myself. Then I heard the front door slam downstairs. Alex is back, I thought. I went down and called out to him, telling him I hadn't had a chance to start dinner yet, but the living room was empty. "Alex, you there?" No answer. I figured maybe it was just the wind, but even then, I felt this strange, creeping unease start to stir inside me. I've always been an anxious person, and my psychiatrist taught me how to analyze situations rationally. I was supposed to go through the event, weigh the possibilities, and remember that the scary explanations were usually the least likely ones. It helped, usually. I went to the table to start making dinner. I washed some vegetables, boiled some potatoes, and even sliced up some fruit, but Alex still hadn't come back. I started to worry. These parts could be dangerous, even during the day. Wild animals lived in the forest, and we'd been warned about that. I grabbed my phone and tried to call him, but I'd forgotten. This wasn't the city. There were no cell towers out here. No signal. I waited a little longer, then decided to go see the woman who managed the property. She lived nearby, in a small house tucked away in the woods. I walked over and knocked on her door, but no one answered. The lights were on inside, but the house seemed completely empty. I turned back and headed down the trail, hoping to find my husband. After about 100 feet, I spotted a beam of light through the trees. It was Alex. He was walking toward me with the flashlight on. "Where have you been?" I asked. "You were gone so long." He said he'd heard some kind of scream and went to check it out, but didn't find anything. We walked back toward the house together. As we approached, I noticed something strange. The lights were no longer shining from the windows. The house, bathed in moonlight, looked cold and menacing. We got closer, confused about what could have happened to the electricity. Inside, it was pitch dark. We used our flashlights to look around the house. Inside, everything was quiet. There was no obvious reason for the power outage. We decided to walk back over to the manager's house, but she still wasn't there. Where could she have gone in a place like this, surrounded by nothing but forest? We returned and decided to eat. The light from the fireplace was enough to sit at the table. I couldn't stop thinking about how eerie the house felt. Alex, meanwhile, was calculating how much money his parents must have spent on this trip. After dinner, we sat on the couch reminiscing. Our wedding, old friends, good times. Then the lights began to flicker, and 2 of the bulbs exploded. Glass shards flew across the room. One cut my shoulder. What the hell? A power surge? We tried calling Maria on the landline, but there was no answer. Alex suggested we go upstairs and try to get some sleep. It was late, but I knew I wouldn't sleep a second. While he was setting up the bed, I went to the bathroom to wash up. It was pitch black. I had to brush my teeth by feel. Then I heard a sound. Something fell. Probably Alex dropped something. When I stepped out a minute later, he was gone. I called for him. No response. I walked into the hallway. Called again. Still nothing. I went downstairs. Another strange noise. What the hell? Alex? Is that you? Silence. I tried not to panic, really, but I'm not good at controlling my thoughts. Then, as I walked through the dark hallway, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Alex. He scared the hell out of me. He whispered for me to stay quiet. He'd heard something too. He thought maybe it was an animal, but then he heard a cough. A human cough, somewhere inside the house, or directly beneath it. My heart nearly stopped. My leg muscles twitched. Alex said we needed to grab our bags and leave immediately. We crept to the door. Only the bags by the fireplace remained. We moved slowly, and as we reached the kitchen, we saw him. An old man, maybe in his mid-50s, standing in front of the fridge, staring at our food. I almost screamed. His face was lit only by the flickering firelight. Then he turned and looked straight at us. I froze. I couldn't move. Total paralysis. The man grabbed a knife from the table. "Run!" Alex shouted. We bolted out the door and ran to the housekeeper's cabin. Still no sign of her. Alex smashed a window and we climbed inside. There was a radio on the table. We used it to call for help. The man with the knife never followed us. He just disappeared. So did Maria. The police looked for both of them, but we never got any answers. We went back home almost immediately. Maybe the man had been living in the woods. Maybe he did something to her. Or maybe she was part of it too. We'll probably never know. The house is no longer available for rent. My name is Sergey, and I live in Siberia. I live in a small town where winters are brutally cold. Temperatures can drop to minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit, but in the summer, it gets really hot. I film videos for my YouTube channel. I hike deep into our massive forests and spend the night there with just a tent, a campfire, and some good food. I record everything on camera, though I don't get many views yet. But I'm not here to promote my channel. I'm here to share what can happen to you alone in the woods at night, when there's no one around but the wild. This happened a long time ago. I don't even remember how many years it's been, but back then, I had just started going on solo camping trips. Since I was a kid, I've loved going into the forest to be alone. That day was hot. I packed my hiking backpack and headed into the woods. I had taken this route before, but this time I planned to veer off and explore areas I'd never been to before. It was a tough hike, but I was motivated. I wanted to test my skills. After several hours, I found a beautiful spot. The ground was flat, perfect for setting up camp. I dropped my backpack and sat down to rest. It was stunning there, and the air smelled like fresh pine trees. But it wasn't time to relax. I unpacked my gear and started setting up my tent. It took me about 30 minutes. Then I lit a fire and went to gather more wood. When I came back 10 minutes later, I noticed my backpack was open. Maybe I just forgot to zip it, or maybe a bear had stopped by and eaten my ham. I tossed the firewood down and pulled out my cooking pot. I needed to boil water to make some pasta. In Russia, pasta with canned beef is a classic camping meal. Everybody loves it. Everything was going well, and the day was winding down. The sun set quickly, and by 6 p.m. it was already dark. But my campfire gave me enough light to see the tent and what was inside. At night, the forest changes. It takes on a whole different feeling. I think most people know what I mean. It's like walking into your school building at night when no one's there. Only the forest is way scarier than empty hallways. I sat by the fire and tried to enjoy the silence. But no, I couldn't. Because at night, the wild comes alive. I kept hearing rustling. Rabbits maybe, or raccoons. Could have been moose or foxes. I didn't see them, but I knew they saw me. Around midnight, I crawled into my tent to sleep. That's when I heard branches snapping, close to my campsite. I figured it was nothing and fell asleep. But an hour later, I woke up to the sound of wolves howling in the distance. It was a whole pack. The howls were far off, so I knew they probably wouldn't come near me. Still, I couldn't fall back asleep. I sat up in my sleeping bag, thinking about stepping outside the tent, and then I saw it, a shadow by the fire. I froze, totally silent. The shadow stood near the firelight. It looked like a person, but not quite. Tall, with long arms and legs. It didn't make sense. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I just sat there, waiting to see what would happen. After a couple of minutes, the figure ran off into the forest. I unzipped the tent a little and peeked out. I stared into the darkness, into the forest. Every twisted tree branch looked like some kind of monster or demon. And then, I saw it, standing in the middle of the clearing, staring directly at me. That same black silhouette, human-shaped, long limbs, pitch black. I froze. It saw me. Later, I learned how to describe the feeling I had. It was like sleep paralysis, except I was wide awake. I felt pure fear. The fear of someone, or something, being there with me. The fear of death. The fear of being powerless and not in control. I laid back in my sleeping bag and left the tent flap slightly open. I didn't sleep all night. I just stared at the tent opening, waiting for something to happen. Morning came. When it got light out, I slowly stepped out of the tent and looked in the direction where that creepy figure had stood. There was nothing there now, just crooked branches. And if you looked closely, you could tell that's probably what I saw during the night too. I started to calm down and began packing up my things. But there was one thing I couldn't explain. Who was standing by my fire last night? Who or what did I see? And did I just dream it all?